It's funny how life has a way of turning on you when you least expect it. One minute, everything's perfect. Wife, kids, job, the whole American dream wrapped up in a neat little bow. The next, you're standing in the middle of a nightmare, wondering how the hell you got there. My name's Dave, and I've been married to Jessica for 17 years. We've got two kids, Emily and Jake, 14 and 12. On the surface, everything seemed great. Jessica's a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids and the house while I bust my ass working as a regional manager for a logistics company. I'm on the road a lot, but I figured it was a small price to pay for the life we had. Jessica and I met in college, back when I was still trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do with my life. She was this beautiful, free-spirited girl with a smile that could light up a room. I was hooked from the moment I saw her. We got married a couple of years after graduation and everything seemed to fall into place. We bought a house, had kids, and settled into what I thought was a pretty damn good life. But then things started to change. Little things at first. Jessica seemed distant, less interested in our conversations, more focused on her phone or the TV. She used to be all over me when I got home from work, but now it felt like I was just another piece of the furniture. Sex, which used to be regular and passionate, became infrequent and mechanical, like she was just going through the motions. I tried to chalk it up to the stress of raising two kids, but there was something in the back of my mind that wouldn't let it go. I should have trusted my instincts. It wasn't until last Friday that my suspicions really kicked into high gear. I got home late from a business trip, one of those long, grueling weeks where everything that could go wrong did. All I wanted was to take a hot shower, grab a beer, and collapse on the couch. But when I walked into the house, something felt off. The lights were dim, the kids were already in bed, and the whole place was too quiet. I found Jessica in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine and her phone in hand. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're up late." She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Just catching up on some messages," she replied, her tone flat. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning down to kiss her. She turned her head slightly, and I ended up kissing her cheek instead of her lips. "Yeah, just tired," she said, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "How was your trip?" "Long. I'm beat." I sat down next to her, but she shifted away like she couldn't wait to get some space between us. "You sure you're okay? You seem a little off." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Dave. Just tired, like I said." I didn't push it. Maybe I should have, but I was too damn tired to argue. I grabbed my beer and headed upstairs to take that shower, leaving Jessica alone with her wine and her phone. But as the hot water washed over me, my mind kept replaying the way she looked at me, like I was a stranger intruding on her night. That's when it hit me. Jessica had been acting weird for months, maybe even longer. It wasn't just the lack of interest or the cold shoulder, it was the way she avoided eye contact. The way she always had an excuse to be somewhere else. The way her phone never left her side. She'd always been pretty open with her texts and emails, but now her phone was like a part of her. Always on, always in her hand, always turned away from me. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops through his wife's phone like some paranoid freak. But something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something big. So the next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until Jessica was in the shower, grabbed her phone off the nightstand, and started scrolling through her messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Texts from friends, family, the kids' school. But then I saw it. A conversation with someone named Tyler, buried in the middle of her chat list. I didn't recognize the name, and my heart started pounding as I opened the thread. What I found made my blood run cold. The messages were casual at first, talking about mutual friends making plans to meet up for drinks. But as I scrolled further back, the tone changed. The text became flirty, suggestive. Then about a month ago, they crossed a line. Jessica. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we do it again?" Tyler. "As soon as you want, babe. That was amazing." Jessica. "You're going to get me in trouble." There it was. The confirmation of my worst fears, spelled out in black and white on her phone screen. My wife, the mother of my children, was having an affair with my best friend. Tyler and I had been friends since high school. We'd been through everything together. College, first jobs, marriages. He was the one guy I could always count on, the one person I thought would never betray me. And now, he was screwing my wife behind my back. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and my mind was racing with a million thoughts at once. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? To us? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? I heard the water stop in the bathroom, and I knew I didn't have much time. I quickly put the phone back where I found it and tried to compose myself. But inside, I was falling apart. My marriage, my friendship, my entire life, it was all crumbling around me, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. As Jessica walked out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I forced a smile. "I'm heading out for a bit," I said, grabbing my keys off the dresser. "Where are you going?" she asked, her tone casual, like nothing had changed. "Just need to clear my head," I replied, my voice tight. She nodded, seemingly unconcerned. "Okay, see you later." I walked out of the house, got into my car, and drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. My mind was a mess, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wrap my head around what I'd just discovered. Jessica and Tyler. How the hell had I missed it? How had I been so blind? By the time I finally headed back home, I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out the full extent of their betrayal, and when I did, there would be hell to pay. After that gut-wrenching discovery, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind was plagued by the images, the words, the sheer betrayal of it all. Jessica's smiling face had become a mask hiding deceit, and Tyler, well, I couldn't even think about him without wanting to punch something. That night I barely slept, tossing and turning as the reality of my situation sunk in. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them together, and it made my blood boil. The next day, I went through the motions at work, but my mind wasn't there. All I could think about was how I was going to catch them in the act. It wasn't enough to know they were screwing around behind my back. I needed proof, undeniable proof, and I needed to see it for myself. I know it sounds twisted, but there's something about seeing the betrayal with your own eyes that solidifies it, makes it real. I needed to confront them, to make them face the damage they'd caused. I knew Jessica had been spending a lot of time out of the house recently, going to yoga classes, meeting up with friends, or running errands that took hours. I'd been suspicious before, but now I was certain that these were just excuses to meet up with Tyler. The thought of them together made me sick to my stomach, but I forced myself to push through the nausea. I needed to catch them. On Wednesday, I told Jessica I had to work late. She barely looked up from her phone when I mentioned it, just nodded and said, "Okay, see you when you get home." The lack of interest in my schedule was a dead giveaway that she had plans of her own. I waited until the afternoon, then texted her that I'd be home later than expected. Something about a work meeting that was running late. It was bullshit, of course, but I needed her to think she had all the time in the world. I drove to the house, parking a few streets over so she wouldn't see my car. My heart was pounding as I walked the rest of the way, each step heavier than the last. I crept up to the house, my ears straining to hear any noise coming from inside. The lights were off, but that didn't mean anything. My hand trembled as I reached for the spare key hidden under the doormat. I slipped it into the lock, turning it slowly so the click wouldn't give me away. As I stepped inside, the house was eerily silent, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. My feet felt heavy as I walked down the hall, past the living room, toward the master bedroom. With each step, my pulse pounded louder in my ears, a drumbeat of fury and betrayal. When I reached the bedroom door, I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. A part of me didn't want to see what was on the other side, didn't want to confirm the ugly truth that was lurking there. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I had to see it. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me felt like a knife to the heart. There they were, Jessica and Tyler, tangled up in our bed, our sheets. The room reeked of sex, the scent hitting me like a wave. Jessica's back was arched, her hands gripping Tyler's shoulders as she moaned his name, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there, watching them betray me. For a moment I just stood there, frozen in place. my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I should have been enraged, ready to tear the room apart, but instead I felt numb, like I was watching it all happen to someone else. This wasn't my life. This couldn't be my life. Then the numbness broke, and the rage came flooding in. "What the fuck is this?" My voice came out as a roar, loud enough to shake the walls. They both jumped, Jessica's eyes flying open in shock as she saw me standing in the doorway. Tyler scrambled off her, nearly tripping over the sheets in his haste to cover himself. Jessica grabbed the blanket, pulling it up to her chest, as if that could somehow shield her from the reality of what she'd done. "Dave, Jessica started, but I cut her off. "Don't you fucking dare!" I snapped, my voice shaking with fury. "Don't you fucking dare try to explain this away!" Tyler, that cowardly son of a bitch, had the nerve to speak up. "Dave, man, I'm sorry, I didn't— Shut the hell up!" I took a step forward, my fists clenched at my sides. "You think you can fuck my wife and get away with it? You think I'm just going to stand here and take this?" He backed up, raising his hands defensively. "Dave, calm down. Let's just talk about this." But I wasn't in the mood to talk. I'd been friends with Tyler for over 20 years, and this was how he repaid me, by sneaking around with my wife, fucking her in my bed. The anger that had been simmering inside me exploded, and before I knew what I was doing, I launched myself at him. The first punch landed squarely on his jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the wall. He tried to block the next one, but I was too fast, too angry. My fist connected with his face again, and I felt something crack under the impact. Maybe his nose, maybe his cheekbone. I didn't care. I just wanted to hurt him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. "Dave, stop!" Jessica screamed. But I ignored her, all my focus on Tyler. He tried to push me off, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage that I'd never felt before. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed him into the wall, the thud echoing through the room. "You think you can just fuck my wife and walk away?" I snarled, my voice low and dangerous. "You think you can destroy everything I've built and not pay the price?" He was bleeding now, his nose a mess of blood and broken cartilage, but I wasn't done. I raised my fist again, ready to pound him into the ground. But then Jessica grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Dave, please!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Stop! You're going to kill him!" I hesitated, my fist still raised. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to finish what I'd started and beat Tyler to a pulp. But another part of me, the part that was still rational, knew that she was right. If I didn't stop now, I was going to do something I'd regret. Something I couldn't take back. With a snarl of frustration, I shoved Tyler away from me, letting him slump to the floor. He was a wreck, bloodied, bruised, and barely conscious. But I didn't feel any satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where my anger had been. Jessica knelt beside him, sobbing as she tried to help him. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating, over and over again, as if those words could undo the damage she'd done. But it was too late for apologies. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. I'd caught them. I'd seen the truth with my own eyes, and now there was no going back. Our marriage, our friendship, everything was destroyed. And the worst part? I had no idea where to go from here. The room felt like it was shrinking around us, the air thick with tension and the smell of blood. Jessica was still on the floor, her arms wrapped around Tyler as she sobbed uncontrollably. I stood over them, my fists aching from the beating I'd just delivered, my heart hammering in my chest. The rage that had fueled me was now giving way to something darker, an overwhelming sense of betrayal and loss. "Get away from him, Jessica," I growled, my voice low and trembling with barely restrained fury. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "Dave, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for this to happen?" I spat, my voice rising. "What the fuck does that even mean, Jessica? You didn't mean to fuck my best friend? You didn't mean to destroy our marriage? Don't insult me with your bullshit excuses." She flinched at the venom in my words, her grip tightening on Tyler, as if he could somehow protect her from the storm she'd unleashed. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "You think you're the victim here? You think crying and apologizing is going to fix this?" My voice was shaking, the anger barely contained as I took a step closer. "You're nothing but a fucking liar, Jessica. A lying, cheating whore who couldn't even respect the man who gave you everything." Her eyes widened at that. A flicker of something else. Anger, maybe, flashing in her gaze. "Don't you dare call me that," she hissed, her voice low and trembling. "You don't know what it's like, Dave. You don't know what I've been through. What you've been through." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "You're going to make this about you now? You fucked my best friend in our bed, Jessica. How do you think that makes me feel? How do you think that affects our kids, our family?" She stood up then, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and guilt. "You don't get it, do you? You've been gone, Dave. Always working, always on the road. You think providing for us is enough? You think money can replace the love and attention you stopped giving me years ago?" I stared at her, stunned by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Gone was the sobbing, apologetic wife from a moment ago. In her place was a woman who was fighting back, lashing out at me with everything she had. "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're going to blame me for this? For your affair? You left me alone," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "You were never here, Dave. I was lonely, I was miserable, and Tyler was there for me when you weren't. He listened to me, he cared about me." "Cared about you?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. "He used you, Jessica. He used you, and you let him, because you were too fucking selfish to see what you were throwing away." Her face twisted in anger, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "And what about you, Dave? What about the way you treated me? Ignoring me, shutting me out, making me feel like I was nothing more than a housekeeper and a babysitter. Don't you dare turn this around on me!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "I did everything I could for this family. I worked my ass off to give you and the kids a good life. And this is how you repay me? You think it's that simple?" she shot back, her voice sharp and cutting. "You think money is all it takes to keep a marriage together? You think you can just throw some cash at the problem and everything will be fine?" My hands were shaking now, the anger surging through me like a tidal wave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to justify what she'd done, trying to make me out to be the bad guy in all of this. "Don't you fucking dare twist this, Jessica," I warned, my voice deadly calm. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me, to betray our family. Don't act like you were some helpless victim in all of this." She took a step toward me, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, if you'd been there for me instead of always running off to work, maybe things would have been different. Maybe if you weren't such a fucking bitch, we wouldn't be in this mess!" I roared, the words flying out of my mouth before I could stop them. Her hand connected with my face in a flash of movement, the slap ringing out like a gunshot. The force of it snapped my head to the side, and for a moment, the room spun around me. When I turned back to face her, her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with anger and hurt. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How fucking dare you talk to me like that?" I could feel the sting of the slap on my cheek, the heat radiating from the spot where her hand had connected. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional wreckage tearing through me. "Don't you touch me again," I growled, my voice low and menacing. "You have no right to lay a hand on me after what you've done." She stepped back, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around herself, her anger quickly giving way to fear. "Dave, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." But I was beyond apologies. I'd reached my breaking point, and there was no going back. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. And whatever we'd had, whatever love or connection or trust we'd built over the years, it was shattered beyond repair. Tyler, who had been watching the entire exchange from his position on the floor, suddenly found his voice. "Dave, please, man, let's all calm down, okay? We can talk about this." "Shut up," I snapped, turning my glare on him. "You're the last person I want to hear from right now." He flinched, but to his credit, he didn't try to speak again. Smart move, considering I was seconds away from losing whatever was left of my self-control. "Jessica," I said, my voice tight with anger, "you need to get the hell out of my house. Now." She blinked, stunned by my words. "What? Dave? No, we can't. We can't just— I said, get the hell out!" I roared, the force of my voice making her flinch. "Take your shit and get out. I don't want to see your face again." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the betrayal, Done with everything. Dave, please, she begged, her voice trembling. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. Everything's already gone, Jessica, I said, my voice cold and final. You made sure of that the moment you decided to fuck my best friend. She sobbed, her whole body shaking as she clutched at her robe, but I didn't budge. This was the end and there was nothing left to say. Go pack your bags, I said, my voice flat. And don't take your sweet time about it. You have 10 minutes. Jessica stared at me, as if trying to comprehend what I was saying. But then she looked at the shattered remnants of our life, the blood on Tyler's face, the look of finality in my eyes, and she knew I meant it. Without another word, she turned and fled the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway as she disappeared from sight. I stood there, staring after her, a hollow emptiness settling into my chest where the rage had been. Tyler, still crumpled on the floor, dared to speak again. Dave, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Shut the fuck up, Tyler, I hissed, my voice dripping with contempt. You were my best friend. I trusted you, and you fucking stabbed me in the back. He lowered his head, shame written all over his bloody, bruised face. I know, man. I fucked up. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. Sorry doesn't bring back what you took from me. I know. You need to get out of my house, too, I said, my tone final. And don't ever come back. If I see you again, Tyler, I swear to God, I will fucking kill you. He nodded, struggling to his feet as he wiped the blood from his face. I'll go. Good, I said, my voice hard. And if you ever go near Jessica again, I'll make sure you regret it. He didn't say anything, just nodded as he limped toward the door, a broken man. I watched him go, my hands still shaking with residual anger, my heart a hollow shell in my chest. When he was gone, I collapsed onto the edge of the bed. The house was eerily quiet after they left, as if the walls themselves were stunned into silence by what had just happened. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door where Jessica and Tyler had made their exits, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts, none of them coherent. My heart was pounding, but the fury that had fueled my confrontation was slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. I had thrown them both out of my house, but the damage was already done. The betrayal was like a festering wound, and every time I thought about what I'd seen, Jessica's body tangled with Tyler's, their shocked faces when I caught them, it felt like that wound was being ripped open all over again. I couldn't stay in that room, not after what had happened. The bed, the sheets, everything in there was tainted. I stormed out, heading to the kitchen where I poured myself a stiff drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it barely registered. My thoughts were consumed with one thing. Jessica, my wife, the woman I'd spent nearly 2 decades with, had cheated on me with my best friend. The anger that had been temporarily dulled by the alcohol started to flare up again, hotter and more intense. It wasn't enough to just throw her out. I needed her to feel the pain she'd caused me, to understand just how deeply she'd cut me. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my dignity, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I downed the rest of my drink and grabbed my phone, my mind working furiously as I considered my next move. Jessica was probably still packing her things, crying like the victim she liked to pretend she was. But she wasn't the victim here. I was. And it was time she learned that actions have consequences. The first thing I did was cancel all the credit cards that were in my name. Jessica didn't have her own cards. She'd never needed them because I'd always taken care of everything. I'd been the provider, the protector, the one who made sure she and the kids had everything they needed. Well, not anymore. If she wanted to betray me, she could start by figuring out how to pay for her own damn life. Next, I went online and locked her out of all the accounts. Banking, utilities, everything that had her name on it. It wasn't difficult. I'd been the one handling the finances for years, so I had access to all the passwords and security questions. Within minutes, I had effectively cut her off from any financial support. She was on her own now, and the thought of her scrambling to figure out how to survive without me brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. But that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure she understood that there was no going back, no fixing this. I needed to hit her where it hurt the most. Jessica was a social butterfly, always had been. She loved being the center of attention, loved the admiration and envy of her friends. She had built her entire identity around being the perfect wife and mother, the one who had it all, and I was going to destroy that image. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the group chat she shared with her closest friends, other wives and mothers from the neighborhood, women she had coffee with, gossiped with, women who looked up to her as the epitome of what a wife should be. I hesitated for just a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. But then the memory of her and Tyler in our bed flashed through my mind, and any doubts I had vanished. I typed out a message, my hands steady, my anger focused. Ladies, just thought you should all know what your perfect friend Jessica has been up to. I caught her fucking my best friend in our bed today. She's been lying to all of us for God knows how long. I thought you deserved to know the truth about who she really is. I hit send and leaned back, waiting for the fallout. It didn't take long. The messages started flooding in almost immediately, shocked, horrified responses from the women who had once idolized Jessica. The chat was filled with outrage, disbelief, and then, slowly, a shift toward pity. But not for Jessica, for me. The betrayed husband, the man who had been wronged by the woman he loved. But I wasn't looking for their pity. I wanted their scorn, their judgment, to rain down on Jessica like the hellfire she deserved. And I wanted her to know that she had no one to blame but herself. My phone buzzed with a new message. Jessica, calling me over and over again, desperate to do damage control. But I ignored her. Let her deal with the mess she'd made. I had more important things to focus on. With a grim sense of purpose, I moved on to the next phase of my plan. Jessica had a social media presence that she was quite proud of. She posted pictures of our family, carefully curated snapshots of our life that made it seem like we had the perfect marriage, the perfect home. She loved the likes, the comments, the validation from strangers who didn't know that it was all a lie. I logged into her accounts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every platform she used to broadcast her fake perfect life. I started posting, exposing the truth for everyone to see. I uploaded the screenshots of her messages with Tyler, the ones that had confirmed their affair. I added a caption, "This is what the perfect wife and mother looks like." The comments started pouring in almost immediately. Shock, disgust, sympathy. People were tagging her, sharing the posts, spreading the word. Jessica's carefully constructed image was crumbling before my eyes, and I couldn't help but feel a sick sense of satisfaction. She wanted to play the victim? Fine. Let her see what it feels like to be on the receiving end of betrayal. But even as I watched her social media accounts implode, I knew it wasn't enough. I needed to do more, to drive the point home that there was no coming back from this. Jessica had crossed a line, and now I was going to make sure she paid the price. I grabbed my phone again and started dialing numbers. Her parents, her siblings, our mutual friends. Each conversation was the same. I calmly explained what had happened, how I had walked in on my wife fucking my best friend, how she had lied to me, to all of us, for who knows how long. The reactions were varied, some shocked, some angry, some just sad. But the message was clear. Jessica was out, cut off, ostracized. By the time I finished, the whiskey bottle was empty, and the sun was starting to set. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, satisfaction, and a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life. I had loved Jessica, had built a life with her, and now it was all in ruins. But as I looked around the empty house, the silence pressing in on me, I knew there was no going back. Jessica had made her choices, and now she was going to live with the consequences. She had no idea what was coming next. The satisfaction of ruining Jessica's life faded quickly. After all, she wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. Tyler, my so-called best friend, was just as guilty, if not more. He had violated our friendship, destroyed the trust we had built over decades. He had wormed his way into my life, into my marriage, and twisted the knife as deep as it would go. As I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the emptiness of the house pressing in around me, I realized that what I had done to Jessica was only half of what needed to be done. Tyler had to pay too. He had to suffer for what he'd done, just like she was suffering. No. Worse. I wasn't done with him yet. The next day, after a sleepless night filled with dark thoughts and even darker plans, I began setting the wheels in motion. Tyler was a successful guy. too successful for his own good. He worked in finance, held a high-level position at a big firm downtown. He was the kind of guy who had it all: money, a cushy job, respect, and a family who adored him. And I was going to rip all of that away from him. First, I needed to know exactly where to hit him where it hurt the most. I wasn't just going to beat him up and call it a day. No, that would be too easy. I wanted to destroy his entire life, to make sure he never recovered from what he'd done. So I started gathering information, digging into every aspect of his life that I could get my hands on. It wasn't hard. I knew Tyler inside and out, knew his routines, his habits, his weaknesses. I knew that his reputation was everything to him, that he prided himself on being a man of integrity, a family man, a leader in his field. And I knew exactly where to strike. The first step was to make sure that everyone at his firm knew what kind of man they were really dealing with. Tyler's company had a strict code of conduct, a policy that valued ethics and moral character above all else. They took a hard stance against any behavior that could tarnish their reputation, and Tyler's affair with my wife would be more than enough to send them into damage control mode. I knew just who to contact at the firm, a colleague of Tyler's who had always been a bit envious of his success. I'd met the guy a few times at company events, and I could tell he was the type who would jump at the chance to knock Tyler off his pedestal. I called him up, kept the conversation casual at first, before dropping the bombshell. "You might want to know that your buddy Tyler has been screwing around with his best friend's wife," I said, letting the words hang in the air like a noose. I'm sure the higher-ups would love to hear about that. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the gears turning in the guy's head. "You're serious?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Dead serious," I replied, my tone cold. "I've got the evidence to back it up, too. Texts, photos, the whole 9 yards. Do with that information what you will." I hung up before he could respond, a grim smile tugging at my lips. I knew he wouldn't waste any time spreading the word. Tyler's precious reputation was about to take a nosedive, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Next, I turned my attention to his family. Tyler had a wife and 2 kids. A picture-perfect family, at least on the surface. They lived in a nice house in the suburbs, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and appearances mattered more than anything. Tyler had always been proud of the life he'd built, the family he'd created. But I was about to tear all of that apart, too. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, screenshots of their conversations, photos of Jessica and Tyler together, all the sordid details I had unearthed. Then I compiled it all into a neat little package and sent it to his wife. I didn't include a message. The evidence spoke for itself. I could only imagine the look on her face when she saw it, the disbelief, the horror, the gut-wrenching pain, as she realized that her husband, the man she thought she knew, had been betraying her with another woman. And not just any woman, his best friend's wife. It wasn't long before I got a call from Tyler. I had been waiting for it, almost eagerly. I answered on the first ring, leaning back in my chair as I listened to the panic in his voice. "Dave, what the hell did you do?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "My wife, my job. You're trying to ruin me." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped my lips. "Trying to ruin you? I think you've done a pretty good job of that on your own, Tyler." "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "If this gets out, I'll lose everything. Please, Dave, don't do this." "Why shouldn't I?" I shot back, my voice cold and unfeeling. "You didn't give a damn about me when you were fucking my wife. Why the hell should I give a damn about you now?" I made a mistake," he stammered, his words stumbling over themselves as he tried to find some way to reason with me. "It was a mistake, Dave. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice filled with incredulity. "This wasn't just a mistake, Tyler. This was a betrayal. You took everything I valued, my friendship, my marriage, and you pissed all over it, and now you're going to pay. Please, Dave," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just don't take this any further." But his pleas only fueled the fire burning inside me. "It's too late for that, Tyler," I said, my voice final. "You made your bed. Now you can lie in it. And I hope it's as uncomfortable as fucking hell." I hung up before he could respond, the satisfaction of hearing him grovel doing little to quell the storm raging in my chest. I wanted him to suffer, to feel the weight of his actions crushing him from all sides, and from the sound of his voice, it was already starting to happen. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final move to make, one last nail to drive into the coffin of Tyler's life. I waited until the next day, when I knew he'd be at work, trying desperately to keep the pieces of his shattered life from falling apart. Then I drove to his house, parked a few blocks away, and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding with anticipation. I didn't bother knocking when I got there. I had no interest in a conversation with his wife. I had already said everything I needed to in that package I sent her. Instead, I walked around the side of the house to the backyard, where I knew Tyler kept his prized possession. A brand new Mustang, sleek and polished. The car he had been boasting about for months. The car was parked in the driveway, shining under the sunlight like a beacon of Tyler's success. He loved that car, had spent hours waxing it, buffing it, making sure it was always in perfect condition. And now it was time for me to destroy the last thing he loved. I pulled out the tire iron I had brought with me and took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Then with a roar of rage, I swung the iron down onto the windshield, the glass shattering under the force of the blow. The sound was like music to my ears, a symphony of destruction that matched the chaos inside my head. I didn't stop there. I went after the headlights, the side mirrors, the windows, anything that could be smashed, I smashed. The adrenaline surged through me as I wreaked havoc on Tyler's car, each swing of the tire iron releasing some of the pent-up fury that had been eating away at me for days. When I finally stepped back, breathing heavily, the car was a wreck, glass littering the ground, the body dented and scratched beyond recognition. I wiped the sweat from my brow, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction as I surveyed the damage. Tyler had taken everything from me, and now I had taken something from him. I tossed the tire iron into the bushes and walked away, my heart still pounding, but the rage slowly subsiding. I had done what I needed to do, exacted the revenge I had craved. Tyler's life was in ruins, and it was exactly what he deserved. As I drove away from the scene, I knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line, burned every bridge, and there was no more pretending that things could ever be the same. But for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had taken control of my life again, and it felt damn good. The high from my revenge didn't last long. After the adrenaline faded, I was left with a gnawing emptiness that even the destruction of Tyler's life couldn't fill. I had taken everything from him, his job, his family, his precious car. But it hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. I was still angry, still hurt, and still lost in a sea of emotions that I couldn't quite navigate. The house was too quiet, too empty. Every room was a reminder of what I'd lost, of the life that had been shattered beyond repair. I hadn't spoken to Jessica since I threw her out, and while I didn't miss her, there was a part of me that felt unfinished, like there was one last thing that needed to be done before I could truly move on. That's when I decided I needed to talk to her one last time, not to reconcile. There was no way in hell that was happening. But to put an end to things on my terms, to say what needed to be said and to hear her out, if only to solidify that there was nothing left between us. I didn't want to call her, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was desperate or still hung up on her. So instead I sent her a text, short and to the point. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park tomorrow at 3 p.m. She didn't reply right away, and for a moment I wondered if she would even show up. But later that night, my phone buzzed with a response. "Okay, I'll be there." The next day, I drove to the park, my stomach twisted in knots. It was a chilly afternoon, the kind of day that reminded you summer was over and winter was just around the corner. The trees were shedding their leaves, the sky was a dull gray, and there was a bite in the air that made everything feel a little more real, a little more painful. I parked the car and walked to the spot where Jessica and I used to take the kids when they were younger. A bench by the lake, secluded enough for a private conversation, but still in view of the rest of the park. I sat down, my hands clenched into fists in my lap as I waited. She arrived a few minutes later, walking slowly, her head down, her shoulders slumped. She looked different, defeated, smaller somehow. Her once perfectly styled hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she was wearing a coat that looked a little too big for her, like she had thrown it on without much thought. When she finally looked up and saw me, there was no anger, no defiance in her eyes, just a deep, weary sadness. "Dave," she said quietly as she approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica," I replied, nodding for her to sit down next to me. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down, keeping a careful distance between us. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavy in the air between us. I don't know what to say," she finally murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Jessica. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know it doesn't. But I am sorry, Dave. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I turned to look at her, my gaze hard. "Then why did it? Why did you do it, Jessica? What the hell were you thinking?" She bit her lip, her hands twisting in her lap as she struggled to find the words. "I don't know. I don't know why, Dave. I was lonely, I guess. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. Like you didn't care about me." "Didn't care about you?" I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "I worked my ass off for this family, Jessica. I provided for you, for the kids, gave you everything you ever wanted, and you repay me by screwing my best friend? How the hell does that make sense?" "I don't know," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wasn't thinking. I was stupid, selfish. I made a mistake, and now I've lost everything because of it." I stared out at the lake, my heart heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You didn't just make a mistake, Jessica. You made a choice. You chose to lie to me, to betray me, to destroy our family. And now we're all paying the price." She wiped at her tears, sniffling softly. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But Dave, I still love you. I never stopped loving you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the anger flared up again, hot and fierce. "Love? You call this love, Jessica? What you did to me? To us? That's not love. That's something else entirely." She reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. But I pulled away, refusing to let her touch me. "Dave, please. I know I fucked up. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But can't we try to fix this? For the kids, if nothing else." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw her for what she was. Someone who had made a terrible mistake, yes, but also someone who was lost, scared, and desperately clinging to the wreckage of our marriage. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't hate her anymore. I couldn't keep holding on to the anger, the resentment, because it was eating me alive. But forgiveness? That was something I couldn't offer. Not now. Maybe not ever. "I don't know if we can," I said quietly, my voice heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Jessica. I don't know if I even want to try." Her face crumpled, more tears streaming down her cheeks as she broke down completely. "Please, Dave. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll change, I promise. Just don't leave me." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking, but it wasn't enough to move me. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too great. "I already left you, Jessica," I said, my voice cold. "The moment you chose him over me, it was over. We were over." She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. No, it can't be over. We've been together for so long. We can't just throw it all away." I looked down at my hands, the hands that had once held hers so tightly, so lovingly, and now felt nothing but emptiness. "We didn't throw it away, Jessica. You did. You made the choice, and now you have to live with it." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The only sounds, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant laughter of children playing in the park. I could feel her pain, her regret, but it didn't change anything. It didn't undo the damage that had been done. "I'm filing for divorce," I finally said, my voice steady and resolute. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll get the papers soon." She let out a choked sob, her hands covering her face as she wept openly. Please, please, Dave, don't do this. It's already done, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. There's nothing left for us, Jessica. Nothing but memories, and even those are tainted now. She didn't respond, just cried harder, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly buried under the cold, hard truth of what had to be done. This was the end, and no amount of tears could change that. After what felt like an eternity, Jessica finally pulled herself together, wiping at her eyes as she struggled to regain some semblance of composure. What about the kids? She asked, her voice hoarse from crying. How are we going to tell them? We'll tell them together, I said, my voice firm. They need to hear it from both of us. We'll explain that it's not their fault, that we both love them, and that we'll always be there for them, no matter what. She nodded, sniffling. Okay, we can do that. I stood up, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I'll call you when I've spoken to the lawyer about the details. We'll figure out custody, the house, everything. But for now, I think it's best if we keep our distance. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I understand, she whispered. But, Dave, if you ever change your mind, if you ever want to try again, I'll be here. I'll be waiting. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, the sound of her sobs fading as I put more distance between us. Each step felt heavy, but with every stride, I felt a sense of finality, of closure, that had been eluding me. This was the end of our story, the final chapter in a book that had started with so much promise, so much love, and had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. There was no going back now, no undoing what had been done. As I reached my car, I took one last look at the park, at the place where we had once been happy, once been a family. But the memories didn't sting as much as they had before. They were just memories now, fragments of a life that no longer existed. I got into the car and drove away, leaving Jessica, the park, and everything else behind. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know how I was going to rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been. But I knew one thing for sure. I was free. And that was the first step toward a new beginning. The days after that final conversation with Jessica were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and difficult conversations with the kids. I knew this was going to be the hardest part, not for me, but for Emily and Jake. They were old enough to understand that something was wrong, that their parents were no longer the united front they had always known. But nothing could prepare them for the truth that was about to shatter their world. When the day came to sit them down and explain everything, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. Jessica arrived at the house looking pale and exhausted, her eyes hollow from days of crying. We didn't exchange more than a few words. Everything that needed to be said between us had already been said. Now it was time to focus on the kids, on how we would handle the fallout of our broken marriage. We gathered Emily and Jake in the living room, sitting them down on the couch while Jessica and I took seats across from them. They looked at us with wide, worried eyes, sensing that whatever was about to happen wasn't good. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Jake asked, his voice wavering. Jessica took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached out to take his hand. Sweetheart, your dad and I have something very important to tell you. Emily's eyes filled with tears before Jessica even finished speaking. She was always the more sensitive of the two, always attuned to the emotional undercurrents in the family. You're getting a divorce, aren't you? She whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I felt my heart break a little more at the sight of her tears, but I knew there was no way to soften this blow. Yes, Emily, we are, I said, my voice heavy with sorrow. Your mom and I, we're not going to be together anymore. The room was filled with the sound of their sobs, their little bodies shaking as the weight of our words hit them. Jessica and I exchanged a pained look, but there was no going back now. We had to be strong, for their sake. We know this is hard to understand, Jessica said, her voice trembling. But we both love you very much. That's never going to change. No matter what happens, we'll always be here for you. Why? Jake asked. tears streaming down his face. Why are you doing this? What happened? I struggled to find the right words to explain the unexplainable. How could I tell them that their mother's betrayal was the reason for this, that the woman they looked up to had shattered our family with her actions? But I knew I couldn't place that burden on them. They didn't need to know the ugly details, not yet. Sometimes things happen between adults that are hard to explain, I said carefully, choosing my words with great care. Your mom and we've grown apart, and we've decided that it's best for everyone if we live separate lives. But that doesn't mean we love you any less. Jessica nodded, wiping at her tears. This is not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. We both made mistakes, and now we're trying to do what's best for all of us. Emily buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. But I don't want you to get a divorce. I want things to go back to the way they were. I reached out, pulling her into my arms, holding her close as she cried. I know, sweetheart, I know. But sometimes we can't go back. We can only move forward. And we'll do it together, I promise. Jake was quieter, his tears falling silently as he stared down at the floor. Where are we going to live? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We're still figuring that out, Jessica said softly. But we're going to make sure you have everything you need. You'll spend time with both of us, and we'll do everything we can to make this easier for you. The conversation was long, painful, and exhausting, but by the end of it, we had reassured them as much as we could, made promises that we would try to keep, and tried to give them a sense of stability in the midst of the chaos. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the pain they were feeling, but it was a start. After the kids went to bed, I walked Jessica to the door. She hesitated before leaving, turning to face me with a mixture of guilt and gratitude in her eyes. Thank you for not telling them the truth, she said quietly, about why this is happening. I shrugged, my emotions too raw to offer her any comfort. They don't need to know right now. It's enough that they're going through this. Let's not make it any harder. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes again. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. We'll work out the details. Yeah, I replied, my voice hollow. We will. She lingered for a moment, as if she wanted to say something more. But then she just nodded and walked out the door. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a deep, numbing emptiness. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, custody arrangements, and logistical nightmares. I met with my lawyer regularly, hashing out the terms of the divorce, the division of assets, and most importantly, the custody of the kids. We agreed on joint custody, with the kids spending equal time with both of us. It was the best solution for them, even if it meant more complicated logistics for us. Jessica moved into a small apartment nearby, close enough for the kids to go back and forth between our homes without too much disruption. We both tried to keep things as normal as possible for them, maintaining their routines, attending their school events, and putting on a united front whenever we were together in their presence. But no matter how hard we tried, the tension was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. The community, of course, had heard all about our situation, thanks to my own efforts to expose the truth. The looks, the whispers, the pitying glances were all there, a constant reminder of the scandal that had rocked our lives. But I didn't care about what the neighbors thought. My focus was on getting through each day, on being the best father I could be to Emily and Jake. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected, a testament to how eager we both were to move on. The house was sold, the proceeds divided, and just like that, the life Jessica and I had built together was reduced to numbers on a page, a cold legal transaction. On the day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over, officially over, and while that brought some closure, it also marked the end of a significant chapter of my life, a chapter that had started with so much love, so much hope, and had ended in heartbreak and betrayal. I sat in my new apartment that night, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table in front of me. I had my kids, I had my freedom, but I also had a deep, aching void where my marriage used to be. It was a void I wasn't sure how to fill. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling restless and unsettled. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world wake up outside. The city was bustling with life, people going about their day, unaware of the personal battles being fought in homes just like mine. As I sipped my coffee, I realized that the hardest part of this whole ordeal wasn't going to be the legal battles or the custody arrangements. It was going to be rebuilding my life from the ground up, figuring out who I was without Jessica, without the marriage that had defined me for so long. But as daunting as that prospect was, it was also a little liberating. I had the chance to start over, to redefine myself on my own terms. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a father, a provider, and now, a man who had been through hell and was still standing. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be days when the loneliness would hit hard, when the memories would sting, when the future seemed uncertain. But I had been given a second chance, a clean slate, and I was determined to make the most of it. As I finished my coffee and got ready for the day, I felt a small flicker of hope, a faint light at the end of a very dark tunnel. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the strength to find out. The weeks that followed the finalization of the divorce were some of the most challenging and transformative of my life. It was as if I had been thrust into a new reality, one where everything was different, yet eerily familiar. The routines were the same. Wake up, get the kids ready for school, go to work. But the context had shifted dramatically. I was no longer doing these things as part of a married couple. I was doing them alone, as a single father, navigating a world that had changed overnight. The first few months were the hardest. There were moments when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the silence in my apartment was deafening. I had spent so many years being a husband, being part of a team, that I didn't quite know how to be on my own. The nights were the worst, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, with nothing but my thoughts for company. The anger, the pain, the regret, they all took turns gnawing at me, refusing to let me rest. But life didn't stop because I was hurting. The kids needed me, my job demanded my attention, and slowly, I started to find a rhythm in this new life. I began to embrace the routines that had once seemed so hollow, making breakfast for Emily and Jake, helping them with their homework, attending their soccer games and school events. These were the moments that grounded me, that reminded me why I had to keep going. At work, I threw myself into my job with a renewed focus. The distractions were welcome, and the sense of accomplishment that came from meeting deadlines and achieving goals helped to rebuild my confidence. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Some were sympathetic, others were curious, but I kept the details of my personal life to myself. The office became a place where I could escape, where I could be Dave, the regional manager, and not Dave, the guy whose marriage had fallen apart. Outside of work, I made a conscious effort to reconnect with the people who mattered. I reached out to old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years when my life had revolved around Jessica and the kids. Some of those friendships had faded, but others reignited with surprising ease. It was comforting to be reminded that I had a support system, people who cared about me and wanted to see me happy. One of the biggest challenges was learning how to co-parent with Jessica. We had agreed on joint custody, but that didn't mean things were easy. The tension between us was still palpable, especially in the beginning. There were disagreements over schedules, over rules, over how to handle the kids' emotions. But we both knew that we had to put our differences aside for Emily and Jake's sake. They were the ones who mattered most, and we had to make this work for them. Over time, we developed a kind of rhythm. We communicated mostly through text and email, keeping our interactions as civil and businesslike as possible. The wounds were still too fresh for anything more, but at least we were able to manage the logistics of raising our children without tearing each other apart in the process. As the months passed, I began to notice a change in myself. The pain of the divorce, while still present, was no longer the defining feature of my life. I started to find joy in the small things again. Watching a movie with the kids, going for a run on a crisp morning, having a beer with a friend after work. These moments of normalcy were like stepping stones, leading me out of the darkness and into a place where I could see the light again. One evening, as I was helping Emily with a school project, I realized how much I had changed. We were sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by poster board and markers, when she looked up at me and smiled. A genuine, happy smile. "I like it here, Dad," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I like our new place." It was a simple statement, but it hit me hard. In that moment, I realized that we had made it through the worst of it. We were rebuilding, piece by piece, and we were going to be okay. Emily's smile was a testament to that, a sign that she and Jake were finding their footing in this new world, just as I was. I smiled back at her, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. "I'm glad you like it, sweetie," I said, reaching out to ruffle her hair. "We've been through a lot, but we're going to make this place our own. It's going to be home." She nodded, her eyes bright with hope, and in that moment, I knew that we were on the right path. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, about finding happiness in the midst of the chaos. I started to focus on myself too. The divorce had forced me to take a long, hard look at who I was and who I wanted to be. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role as a husband and father, but now I had the opportunity to rediscover the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of responsibility and routine. I picked up old hobbies that I had abandoned years ago, playing guitar, hiking, photography. I joined a local gym and started working out regularly, finding that the physical exertion helped clear my mind and release the pent-up frustration that still lingered. I even took a weekend trip on my own, something I hadn't done in years. It was just a short getaway to a cabin in the mountains, but it gave me the space I needed to reflect and recharge. And then there was the question of dating. It wasn't something I'd considered seriously in the immediate aftermath of the divorce. Hell, the thought of being with someone else felt like a betrayal of the man I used to be. But as time passed, and the wounds began to heal, I started to wonder if maybe there was room in my life for someone new. It started with small steps. Going out for drinks with friends, attending social events, putting myself out there in ways I hadn't done in years. I wasn't actively looking for a relationship, but I wasn't closed off to the possibility either. I knew that it would take time, that I needed to be patient with myself. But I also knew that I wasn't the same person I had been before the divorce. I was stronger, more resilient, and more aware of what I wanted and needed in a partner. One night, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I was at a friend's birthday party when I met someone. Her name was Sarah. She was smart, funny, and easy to talk to. We spent most of the evening chatting, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. There was a connection there, something that felt real and genuine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement about the future. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks we went on a few dates, dinners, hikes, coffee. It was different from anything I had experienced before, but in a good way. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other and seeing where things might lead. As our relationship began to develop, I realized that I was capable of opening my heart again. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and fear, but Sarah was patient and understanding. She knew about my past, about the scars I carried, and she accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. One evening, as we sat on the porch of her house, watching the sunset, she reached over and took my hand. "You've been through a lot, Dave," she said softly, "but you're stronger because of it, and I think you have a lot of love left to give." Her words hit me deeply, resonating with a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. I did have love left to give, and I wanted to give it, not just to Sarah, but to Emily, Jake, and even to myself. The journey I had been on was painful, but it had brought me to a place where I could see the value in the struggle, the beauty in the resilience. As the months turned into a year, I continued to build my new life, piece by piece. Sarah became an important part of that life, as did my kids, my friends, and the passions I had rediscovered. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. It was part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. I had learned that life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes it throws you a curveball that knocks you off your feet, shatters everything you thought you knew. But it also gives you the chance to rebuild, to redefine who you are, and to find happiness in places you never expected. One day, as I was driving Emily and Jake to their soccer game, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them laughing together in the back seat. It was a simple moment, one that might have gone unnoticed in the chaos of everyday life. But to me, it was everything. It was a reminder that we had survived, that we had come through the storm and found a new kind of peace. I smiled to myself as I turned onto the road leading to the soccer field, the sun shining brightly overhead. There were still challenges ahead, still moments of doubt and fear, but I knew that we would face them together, and that was enough. In the end, I had lost a marriage, but I had gained something far more valuable, an understanding of who I was, what I was capable of, and what truly mattered in life. It wasn't about having the perfect family, the perfect job, or the perfect relationship. It was about being true to myself, about finding joy in the little things, and about loving the people who mattered most. As I parked the car and helped the kids out, I felt a deep sense of contentment wash over me. The past was behind me, the future was uncertain, but the present was here, and it was beautiful, and that was more than enough for me.